when we looked at this, here's Texas A&M's radar chart. And you can see they were not spending much money on stewardship. Their operations were showing some real pressure points. And you can talk to the folks here from A&M. They're nodding their heads. They understand. They're out there dealing with it every day. Customers were not overly pleased. Plus, they weren't getting a lot of capital either. So they were adding to the backlog at a very rapid rate. Because they were adding at a very rapid rate and they did not understand it, one of the key issues was you need to understand what that backlog is. Since it has not been well documented, they needed a better mechanism to start identifying it, because ultimately, how do you pick projects if you don't have a sound database? I often tell people, if you have a $5 million capital budget and you're submitting projects to someone, the CFO or the board, to say this is what we want to do, it's not about the $5 million you recommend. It's about the next $10 million you're choosing to defer. You have to be able to make a compelling case that those projects you're selecting are so much more important than the ones you're deferring, and that there's a logic and a rationale behind that. And the only way to do that is to have a good database of needs and a good understanding of what the backlogs are. The process for project selection tended to favor the space projects. So even though they were spending a fair amount of money, the mix of projects was hurting the ongoing operations and maintenance of the campus facilities and the asset management strategy. That project selection, compounded by decreasing daily service budgets, ultimately were creating even greater and greater pressures. Customers told us that was what the problems were repeatedly, but there was a very interesting program on the energy side where they had taken an initiative, invested a fair amount of money on the capital side, and actually drove to some really impressive results, and then we'll share all those. This is the list of campuses we used as comparisons, and this is back in 2008. Today we'd use a lot more Big 12 schools that we have and a lot of others, but this was back in 08 when we did this study. This was one of those things, data to discovery. When you're on your campus and you're going to the same campus every day, the same university, you really don't realize it. But when you added up the numbers, 400 of the buildings on the campus made up less than 10% of the square feet. A lot of very, very small buildings. Now, that's driving your day-to-day operating costs, because every building has a roof, every building has doors, every building, if you just think about the number of components that you have to deal with, it's truly a challenge. When we looked at it, and we use this as a benchmark that says building intensity, how many buildings per million square feet? A&M was off the charts compared to all their peer group. So fundamentally, one of the core questions is, do you need so many small buildings? Can you consolidate some things, and can you drive to a better outcome? The age. Here you see 34% of the space was between 25 and 50 years old, and another 29% over 50. 63% of every square foot on that campus was more than 25 years old. Ouch. They're spending. We collect the actual projects that every campus does, so we can look at the mix. This is the mix of that whole peer group right here of what they're spending. They were spending more than $1 a square foot more than A&M. When you take out that utility infrastructure projects and you look, it even compounds it. The fascinating thing is when you look at these blue bars, which is the space and program stuff right here, they're spending, on average, the peers are spending about $1.80 a square foot. Look at this. A&M was spending about $2.50 a square foot. They were spending more on the space because of an initiative that was the faculty reinvestment program that really was to upgrade space and change the profile of the campus. So there was an institutional policy and a direction that was doing it. Inadvertently, shift happened. All right? When you looked at it, the amount of money that's actually going into the infrastructure, the building envelopes, this is the envelopes, the infrastructure, and mechanical systems, very, very little compared. It was much less than the $1 a square foot. It was more like $2.50 a square foot. So they needed to affect the mix going forward. We can't change the past, but we can affect the mix going forward. So as a result, we set their stewardship target between it was roughly about $40 million in a year. Their actual investment was running somewhere between $6 and $8 million a year. So their deferral, they were adding $35 million a year to their backlog at that time. Well, my word, we're emptying the bucket. There's a hole in the bottom of this barrel that's a lot bigger than the bucket we're trying to use to fill it with. It's that simple. And unless we change that hole and close that hole up a little bit, the money we pour in there isn't going to start making the buildings any better. You're racing downhill here, and it's just impossible to catch up. When you compare it to the peers, their stewardship spending was well below what the peers were spending to their targets. More interestingly, over the, between 05 and 08, the peers were actually increasing their dollar amount, while A&M was decreasing their dollar investment. Not that the budget went down, but they added a lot of square footage. And when they added the square footage, by default, their cost per square foot on their stewardship started to drop. They didn't balance their spending.